Throughout the Marvel Universe, no friendship/rivalry/bromance has been as great as the one between Professor X and Magneto. While each is dedicated to supporting and defending the mutant race, Professor X believes that mutants and humans can coexist peacefully, while Magneto believes that mutants must rule mankind to survive. This conflict has led them to create their own teams of mutants, the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, who have repeatedly battled over the fate of their species. But even as they fought over ideology, their friendship never truly died. This has led to occasional alliances and quite a few lingering questions, like what treasure hunting adventure forged their friendship? How did their different viewpoints shape the future of the mutant race? And how would they each react when the mutant race finally united as one? We're here to answer all those questions and more. This is Marvel Recap, Professor X and Magneto, with a special shout out to the official handbook of the Marvel Universe research team for their help. When Charles Xavier and Erik Lehnsherr first met as young men, they had lived through two very different childhoods. Xavier grew up in wealth and comfort, the son of Sharon Xavier and Dr. Brian Xavier, a respected nuclear physicist. Although, we should add that he had an evil, unborn twin sister that he attacked in the womb. While she was initially thought to be dead, she psychically survived and eventually resurfaced, taking the name Cassandra Nova. But that's a long way off. When Xavier was only 9, his father was killed in an atomic testing blast in New Mexico. Sharon, convinced that Charles needed a father, married Brian's colleague Dr. Kurt Marco. They moved back east to live in Xavier's ancestral mansion in Westchester, New York, where Charles was forced to live with his abusive new stepfather and his bullying stepbrother, Kane Marco. After Charles's mother died, Kane tried to extort money from his father, who he believed had killed Brian Xavier. During the confrontation, Kane accidentally set off a lab explosion. Dr. Marco managed to carry Kane and Charles to safety, but soon died from smoke inhalation. Not long after, Charles's mutant power of telepathy fully manifested for the first time, which he used to become a top student and star athlete. By the age of 16, Charles had left home to attend Harvard and soon won a scholarship to England's Oxford University. There, he studied genetic mutations, looking to discover the source of his powers. He also became close with a young Scottish genetic scientist, Moira Kinross, and they soon were engaged. But before they were married, Xavier enlisted in the military and served alongside his stepbrother during an overseas conflict. There he witnessed Kane try to steal the Crimson Gem of Sidorak from a ruined temple, which transformed him into the monstrous Juggernaut. Later, Xavier received a letter from Moira breaking their engagement. Instead, she married her former boyfriend, Joseph McTaggart, a commando in the Royal Marines, and became Moira McTaggart. But it proved to be an unhappy marriage, and they separated, although he refused to grant her a divorce. Left with no family or loved ones, Charles decided to travel the world, searching for mutants like himself. As for Magneto, he was born Max Eisenhardt, the son of jeweler Jakob Eisenhardt and his wife Edie, and grew up in Nuremberg, Germany. As the only Jewish child in his school, Max was the target of constant bullying, but soon befriended a young servant girl named Magda. To impress her, Max won a school javelin competition, only to be accused of cheating by the school officials, who refused to believe a Jewish student could beat the rest of his classmates. He was ordered to either give up his medal or recreate the throw with a regulation javelin. But when he succeeded, he was again accused of cheating and expelled before being beaten by his classmates. As the Nazis grew to power, Max's family tried to escape their reach by moving to Poland, which was soon invaded by Germany. After being captured by Nazi soldiers while trying to escape the ghetto in 1942, Max and his family were set to be executed. Max only survived by subconsciously using his powers to make the bullets miss him. He managed to evade Nazi attention for a time, but he was eventually captured and brought to the Auschwitz concentration camp. His treatment there solidified his ideas about the brutality humanity could inflict on others. The one bright spot was that he was eventually reunited with Magda. During a camp revolt 2 years after his arrival, Max helped her escape, and gradually they made their way to a village in the nearby Carpathian Mountains, where they married and had a daughter, Anya. Eventually, they moved to the Soviet Union, where Max struggled to find work. When a supervisor tried to cheat him out of his pay, Max used his burgeoning mutant powers to fling a crowbar at the man, scaring him into giving Max what he was owed. But by the time he returned home, Max found his house in flames, as the supervisor had told the KGB about Max assaulting him. When Max tried to rescue his daughter, the KGB agents restrained him, and he was forced to watch her jump to her death to escape burning alive. Enraged, Max used his powers to kill the KGB agents. Magda, terrified of her husband's new ability, fled. We'd later learn that Max took on the identity of Erik Magnus Lehnsherr and went in search of Magda, only to discover that she had died. He eventually moved to the Middle East, and as Erik Magnus, he began volunteering at a hospital that specialized in treating survivors of the Holocaust. That's where he met Charles Xavier, who had traveled to the hospital at the request of one of its doctors, who wanted the help of the most instinctive psychologist he knew in reaching a catatonic Holocaust survivor named Gabrielle Haller. Xavier used his telepathy to help treat her mental trauma, waking her from her catatonic state. As Gabrielle recovered, she, Charles, and Magnus became good friends, although each had differing opinions on how the emerging mutant race should deal with the rest of humanity. Magnus felt humanity would destroy mutants out of fear, so the only way to guarantee the survival of mutants was for them to hold the reins of power. Charles felt that security could not be imposed by fear, but must grow from understanding and coexistence. Soon after Gabrielle and Xavier became romantically involved, the hospital was attacked by agents of the terrorist group Hydra. They kidnapped Gabrielle, wounding Charles in the process. Magnus used his powers to destroy one of the fleeing transports, alerting Xavier to his mutant powers. Charles demanded to know if it was necessary to slaughter the troops, and Magneto was amazed at the question. After all, hadn't Charles killed men while serving as a soldier? Charles had to admit he had, but that he killed to survive, and the memory still sickened him. Xavier secretly used his telepathic powers to track the kidnappers to Africa, where Hydra leader and former Nazi Baron Strucker tortured Gabrielle until she revealed the location of a hidden reserve of Nazi gold. Xavier used his telepathy to turn the soldiers against each other, while Magnus defeated Baron Strucker by magnetically crushing Strucker's Satan Claw. Standing over his fallen foe, Magnus revealed that he cared nothing for humanity, as he felt that mutants would take their place as lords of the earth. Magnus took the gold for himself, telling Xavier that he was far too trusting and saying, "You have faith in the essential goodness of man. In time, you will learn what I have, that even those you love will turn from you in horror when they discover what you truly are. Mutants will not go meekly to the gas chambers. We will fight, and we will win." However, Xavier telepathically replied, "Must the future of Homo Superior be written in blood and fire? The world has seen too much of that, Magnus. There has to be a better way, and I intend to find it." Magnus went on to work with a covert intelligence agency where he used his powers to hunt down Nazi war criminals. But after a mission where Magnus deviated from orders, his agency contacts killed his girlfriend, Isabel, which was payback for Magnus executing a former Nazi that they had allied with. But before they could eliminate Magnus, he overpowered them. He was once again disgusted by this senseless brutality of humans, so he rejected his human name and adopted a new one, Magneto. Meanwhile, Xavier continued his worldwide search for new mutants, eventually ending up in the Himalayas. Instead of finding a fellow mutant, he encountered an evil alien named, appropriately enough, Lucifer. Xavier managed to thwart Lucifer's plans of conquest, but as the alien escaped, he dropped a giant stone on Xavier, paralyzing him. Eventually, Xavier returned to America and began using what he'd learned to train young mutants, like the psychic Jean Grey, to control their powers. But he soon encountered Magneto again and cautioned his old friend that he had gone down the road to becoming what he hated. Magneto mocked Xavier, saying that he was supposed to be the great man who was supposed to lead mutantkind, but now he was confined to a wheelchair. Xavier replied that he may have lost the use of his legs, but at least he still had his heart, which was more than he could say about his old friend. The two parted that night, each convinced that their two philosophies couldn't coexist, knowing that a war between them was inevitable. To defend against the coming threat of Magneto, Xavier began secretly working with FBI agent Fred Duncan to track down mutants he could train. He turned his family's mansion into Xavier's school for gifted youngsters and began training the young mutants he'd found into a team of heroes he dubbed the X-Men for their extra powers. And definitely not because his name also began with an X. Their first public mission turned out to be against Magneto, who seized control of the Army's missile base at Cape Citadel. While the X-Men managed to defeat him, Magneto soon became their greatest enemy. To fight them, he also assembled his own team of mutants, who each shared his view of mutant supremacy. This group, which he dubbed the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, included the mutant twins Pietro and Wanda Maximoff, aka Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Magneto would come to believe they were his children through Magda. However, he would eventually discover that the twins were actually unrelated to him and had been given powers by the geneticist known as the High Evolutionary. But that's a story for another recap. And despite learning of their true heritage, Magneto still thinks of them as his children. The X-Men and the Brotherhood would clash repeatedly until Magneto used alien technology to create a being he called Alpha, the Ultimate Mutant. Magneto intended Alpha to conquer the world on his behalf, but Alpha turned on his creator and used his powers to turn Magneto and the Brotherhood into babies. Xavier placed baby Magneto in the care of his former college love, Moira McTaggart. However, what he didn't know was that she used her knowledge of genetics to secretly alter baby Magneto's DNA in an attempt to prevent him from turning evil as he grew up. Magneto's second childhood proved to be short-lived, as the Shi'ar agent Erik the Red used alien technology to age him back to young adulthood. Furious that Xavier had control of him while he was a helpless baby, Magneto quickly attacked Professor X's all-new X-Men team. The rest of the Brotherhood were also returned to adulthood, but found themselves abandoned by Magneto. They soon fell under the control of the mutant criminal the Vanisher, but later reformed under the leadership of the shapeshifter Mystique, who was committed to achieving Magneto's dream of mutant supremacy. Over time, Erik's hatred of Charles and his dreams of human and mutant cooperation began to soften. We got the first glimpse of this in the Days of Future Past storyline, where a Magneto from an alternate future reality was a part of a future X-Men team, trying to survive in a world where mutants were enslaved by humans. While an older version of X-Man Kitty Pryde, Kate, tried to prevent this future by traveling back in time to inhabit her younger self, Magneto sacrificed himself to stop Sentinels from interrupting her mission. The time-traveling Kate was successful in preventing Mystique's new Brotherhood from assassinating anti-mutant Senator Robert Kelly, an act she hoped would change history for her own reality. Later, back in the original timeline, Magneto embarked on one of his most ambitious schemes, where he ordered the leaders of the world to dismantle their nuclear arsenals. Any who refused to comply would be destroyed. Magneto explained to one of Xavier's students, Cyclops, that he did this to ensure the safety of mutant kind, saying that the world could now use the $1 trillion they spent each year on nuclear weapons towards the eradication of hunger, disease, and poverty. However, the Soviet Union refused to comply, and one of their nuclear submarines fired missiles at Magneto. He effortlessly disarmed the missiles, then sank the sub with all hands aboard. Furious, Magneto then used his powers, amplified by technology, to create a volcano that destroyed the Soviet city of Verikino. As the X-Men sneaked onto the island and prepared a surprise assault on Magneto, Xavier blasted his longtime frenemy with a long-range psychic attack. However, during the battle, an enraged Magneto sent a lethal blast of electricity into Kitty Pryde, but was horrified to see she was just a child. After the death of his daughter, Anya, he'd sworn that he would not rest until he had created a world where mutants could live free and safe and unafraid. But instead, he'd slain this girl. Storm was ready to kill him, but he would not fight her. He realized that he had become like those he hated and despised. Luckily, Kitty was phasing when she was hit with the electricity, which allowed her to survive. But by the time she awoke, Erik had escaped, abandoning his plans for world domination. We saw more of this slightly remorseful Magneto in the graphic novel God Loves, Man Kills. In it, Reverend William Stryker's anti-mutant crusade led to the execution of several young mutants, which prompted Magneto to approach the X-Men as an ally. They worked together to free Xavier from Stryker's clutches. However, Cyclops was skeptical of Magneto's intentions. Magneto argued that he was not the X-Men's enemy and that his goal of conquering the Earth was solely to create a world where the mutant race, Homo Superior, could live in peace. When Cyclops called his dream a mutant dictatorship, Magneto replied, "I have lived under a dictatorship and seen my family butchered by its servants. When I rule, it will be for the betterment of all." The X-Men and Magneto confronted Stryker at a rally in Madison Square Garden, where Stryker planned to use a version of the X-Men's mutant hunting computer Cerebro to amplify Xavier's powers to kill countless mutants. But Stryker's followers started to waver when he discovered that one of his lieutenants was a mutant and pushed her to her death. Stryker held that mutants were not human, aiming his gun at Kitty Pryde. But before he could shoot, he was taken out by a police officer. Back at the X-Mansion, Magneto argued that Stryker's cause would continue and that they couldn't win against it while upholding Xavier's ideals. Surprisingly, Xavier agreed, saying that while he'd spent his whole life working towards mutant-human cooperation, maybe Magneto's way was better. However, Cyclops argued that Xavier had brought the X-Men together to fulfill a dream, one born out of hope and the noblest of human aspirations. And they'd sweated, bled, and even died to make it a reality. He wasn't prepared to give that up. After listening to his student, Xavier changed his mind and refused to join with Magneto. Magneto called them all fools, saying, "I have wept over too many graves, X-Men. I will not do so over yours." But despite that harsh farewell, Magneto's attitude toward Xavier began to change during the first Secret Wars limited series. In it, the alien Beyonder gathered the heroes and villains he deemed to be the strongest to fight each other on a planet he created, Battleworld. While Xavier, who it should be noted regained the ability to walk through use of a cloned body, and the X-Men were sorted into the hero category, so was Magneto. And while some called him a murderer, he argued that he had simply fought in the defense of the mutant race. Some of the heroes wanted to exclude Magneto, but Xavier and the X-Men came to his defense. Magneto left, as he didn't want mutant blood to be spilled on his behalf. Magneto watched the unfolding conflict and suddenly felt kinship for the humans who were experiencing the same feelings as himself. Those feelings led him to a romantic date with Janet Van Dyne, aka the Wasp. When Xavier and the X-Men arrived to propose an alliance, Magneto agreed, saying they could work together to create a golden age where mutants and humans could live in peace. However, it turned out that Wasp was only pretending to be interested in Magneto so she could learn his plans. Xavier stopped Magneto from retaliating against her. He argued that if they were to ally, Magneto had to agree that whatever noble ends we seek do not justify evil means. Magneto and Xavier found themselves working together for a common goal and growing closer in the process. Their time together changed Xavier's opinion of his former foe. After they returned to Earth, Xavier discovered that the Beyonder followed them home. Xavier was too injured from a recent mugging to handle it himself, so he contacted Magneto telepathically and asked him to lead the X-Men. And with that, Magneto suddenly went from being the X-Men's greatest foe to their new leader. Sometime later, Magneto was attacked by Freedom Force, a government super team made up of former members of Mystique's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. The X-Men tried to stop Freedom Force, but Magneto willingly surrendered, saying that for the good of mutantkind, he would face his accusers and his fate. Gabrielle Haller acted as his defense attorney, with Xavier assisting her, as the World Court charged Magneto with murdering the sailors in the Soviet submarine. He argued that his desire has only been the preservation of mutant kind and to spare them the fate his family suffered in Germany. But before a verdict could be reached, the trial was interrupted by Fenris, the superpowered twin children of Xavier and Magneto's old foe, Baron Strucker. Magneto risked his life to save the judges' lives, but Xavier began succumbing to the grave wounds he had suffered in the mugging not long before. As Xavier lay dying, he offered his old friend a path to redemption, to prove that he had changed his ways by taking charge of Xavier's school and its students. Xavier's love, the alien Shi'ar Empress Lilandra, took him into space to save his life. Magneto was left alone, to weep and promised that he would be true to his word. Magneto was later found innocent by a reconvened World Court and spent the next several months supervising the X-Men and directly mentoring the New Mutants. However, Magneto's abrasive teaching style soon found him clashing with everyone around him. After a series of tragedies that included the presumed death of the X-Men during the Fall of the Mutants storyline and the death of New Mutant Doug Ramsey, Magneto began to question his own leadership and his place in the world. This growing frustration finally led Magneto to quit, as he told Moira McTaggart that Charles should never have offered him the school and he never should have taken it. With that, Magneto left to resume his position as a supervillain, at least in name, saying that if the world was focused on him, they wouldn't be attacking other mutants. Sometime later, Xavier returned from space to find that Magneto had ultimately broken the promise made back in Paris. Xavier resumed leadership of his school and the X-Men, setting the stage for the greatest battles the two former friends had ever faced. After leaving the X-Men, Magneto retired to the solitude of his orbiting base, Asteroid M. But his isolation ended when he was approached by a group of mutants who subscribed to his ideals and begged him to rejoin the fight against anti-mutant forces. He agreed and took on those mutants as his acolytes. To defend his asteroid, Magneto salvaged the nuclear weapons from that Russian submarine he'd destroyed, although he was horrified to be face to face with the skeletons of the men he'd killed. The X-Men tried to stop him, which shook Magneto even further, as he told his lead acolyte, Fabian Cortez, "Why must blood always come between me and others?" Magneto declared to the world that he had turned his orbiting base into a haven for mutant refugees, promising that harm done against any mutant would be harm done to him, and that he would respond accordingly. Magneto's rage only increased when he learned that Moira McTaggart had genetically altered him while he was temporarily a baby in her care, in an effort to prevent him from turning to evil. He kidnapped Xavier and McTaggart, bringing them to Asteroid M, where he punished her by encasing her in metal. Magneto's ruthless behavior shocked Charles, who asked, "Where is the good, decent, honorable man to whom I entrusted my school?" But when Cortez suggested that Magneto use McTaggart's techniques to control Xavier, Magneto refused, saying, "I want him broken. I want his heart to crack. I want him to choke with grief, as I did when I learned of how my old and dear friend had betrayed me." When the X-Men freed Magneto's prisoners, Xavier argued that Magneto's dream could not endure, as it was tainted by the blood of those he'd sacrificed along the way. And now Xavier's former friend held his former fiance's life in his cold, cruel hands. McTaggart then revealed that her attempts to change Magneto had failed, and that the choices Magneto made were the ones he would have made anyway. That's when Cortez fired on the asteroid with a plasma cannon, proving he was willing to sacrifice Magneto and the other acolytes to take out the X-Men. Magneto used his powers to temporarily hold the asteroid together, disabling the nuclear weapons he stole in the process. While Xavier offered to save Magneto and his followers, Magneto refused, deciding to stay behind. For while he may have been tainted by blood and rage and death, perhaps that would be the armor that would sustain him in the war to come. As the X-Men escaped the exploding asteroid, Xavier's telepathy revealed that Magneto had saved his enemies because that was his task in life, to save mutant kind from harm. I give you your dream, Charles, but I fear, in time, your heart will break as you realize it has ever been a fool's hope. Farewell, my friend. Despite this ominous goodbye, Magneto survived and used his powers to create a mutant utopia on a new orbiting base, Avalon. In response, the governments of the world enacted the Magneto Protocols, using a string of satellites to create an energy shield that prevented Magneto from using his powers on Earth. He fought back by creating an electromagnetic pulse that shut down the majority of Earth's technology, forcing the X-Men to travel to Avalon to try and stop him. During the battle, Wolverine wounded Magneto, who then ripped the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton. That caused Charles to snap, and he attacked Magneto with a mind blast while screaming, "You have killed too many, Magnus, and I have had enough!" With that, Xavier wiped Magneto's mind, leaving him in a catatonic state. However, Xavier's angry act allowed the hatred of Magneto's psyche to implant itself within Xavier's soul and join with his repressed emotions. Over time, it gained sentience and evolved into a seemingly unstoppable being called Onslaught. Powered by the dark sides of both Xavier and Magneto's minds and equipped with all of Xavier's psychic might, Onslaught rampaged across the country and was only stopped by the sacrifice of many of Earth's greatest heroes. Eventually, Magneto recovered from Xavier's mind wipe and returned to his desire to create a new mutant homeland. As Avalon had been destroyed, Magneto took control of the Earth's magnetic field and demanded the world allow him to create a mutant haven on Earth. In response, the United Nations granted Magneto sovereignty over the island of Genosha. Genosha had previously been ruled by a brutal regime that treated mutants as laborers and second-class citizens. But with the UN's approval and the help of his acolytes, Magneto seized control of the island from its human rulers, turning it into the mutant utopia he'd dreamt of. However, that paradise didn't last long, as Cassandra Nova, Xavier's evil twin sister, unleashed a group of wild sentinels that attacked the island, killing much of the population, including Magneto. His death made him a symbol of resistance for the mutant community, many of whom adopted the motto, "Magneto was right." Xavier traveled to Genosha to help the survivors of the attack and discovered Magneto was alive, but had no memory of what had happened after the attack. The two decided to work together to help rebuild the island, restoring their friendship in the process. Later, in 2005's House of M storyline, Magneto regained his memories, but soon lost his powers when an insane Scarlet Witch created a spell that called for no more mutants. This act depowered much of the mutant race during what became known as M-Day. And while Magneto helped rebuild Xavier's memories after he suffered a massive head injury, the former Master of Magnetism's desire to regain his powers led him to ally with the High Evolutionary against the X-Men, attacking them with decommissioned Sentinels. The Evolutionary restored Magneto's powers, although the destruction of his machine in the process meant that it couldn't restore any other mutant's powers. Magneto traveled to the depths of space, looking for a way to help the depowered mutants, but was eventually forced to come home. But when he returned, it wasn't to rule, but to join forces with his former enemies once again. While Magneto was away off-planet, the X-Men raised Asteroid M from the ocean depths, transforming it into a floating island in San Francisco Bay. Cyclops declared that it would be open to all mutants, creating a new homeland for his people. Magneto soon arrived, but despite the X-Men's fears, he wasn't there to fight. To prove his good intentions, he gave up his mind-shielding helmet, But that wasn't enough for Xavier, who still felt this was a trap. Magneto tried to calm Xavier down, only to receive a mind blast for his troubles. Cyclops had to tell his former teacher to stand down, but Xavier refused to yield, saying, "I will not let him waltz in here and shatter what is left of mutantkind." But Magneto surprised everyone by complimenting Cyclops' leadership and even bowing to him. And even though Xavier still doubted him, Magneto was accepted into Utopia. Cyclops still didn't fully trust him, although Magneto didn't blame him for it, telling Xavier that he owed them all so much more than an apology. To prove himself, Magneto used his powers to find beloved X-Man Kitty Pryde, who had become trapped in space after she phased a giant bullet through the Earth, saving the planet. Magneto brought her back to Earth safely, although the effort put him into a coma. But soon, he was back up and around, and even gained some positive press after he used his powers to save the Golden Gate Bridge during an earthquake. Over time, Xavier and Magneto had reconciled enough that, after the fall of Utopia, they turned their attention back to long-simmering plans they had begun years before with Moira McTaggart. Plans to create a new mutant nation on the living island of Krakoa. Using the flora from Krakoa, Xavier and Magneto created pharmaceuticals which provided cures for numerous diseases that plagued mankind, and used them to barter with the nations of the world. Their demand: recognize Krakoa as a sovereign nation and receive invaluable mutant medicine. They also learned how to use Krakoa flora to create portals that could instantly teleport mutants anywhere another portal had been planted. After all those years of fighting, they'd finally put their differences aside to create a haven for all mutants to live in peace. Unfortunately, Professor X's dream of a mutant nation proved as finite as Utopia or Genosha. A few years after Krakoa's founding, in the Fall of X storyline, the anti-mutant organization Orchis, aided by the time-displaced Sentinel Nimrod, attacked Krakoa, murdering several of Xavier's former students, including Iceman and Jean Grey. Orchis revealed that they'd discovered a way to kill every human who'd been helped by Krakoa's life-saving drugs. To save their lives, Xavier was forced to accede to their demands and use his mental powers to force Earth's mutants to walk through portals to undisclosed off-Earth locations. However, a small number of mutants used mental training to resist Xavier's command. Unable to mentally connect with the mutants he'd sent through the portal, Xavier became convinced that he'd murdered the mutant race. In a bid to finally defeat Orchis, Xavier pretended to work with them in exchange for Orchis agreeing to spare the remaining Krakoan mutants. During this, Xavier seemingly destroyed a US Space Force frigate, although he'd secretly switched the crew with clones. A team of mutants, including Magneto, finally managed to defeat Nimrod and Orchis, but the world was left thinking Xavier was a mass murderer, and he soon found himself arrested for war crimes. Magneto visited him in his cell, offering to free him, but Xavier refused. Magneto admitted that what they made on Krakoa hadn't been enough, as it had excluded some mutants. For a mutant nation to truly work, it needed all mutants working together. Charles could only chuckle and say that sentiment was basically just Xavier was right. Later, Xavier escaped from his prison cell, deciding to once again leave the planet with his Shi'ar love, Lilandra. But before he left, he met with his most trusted colleagues, including Magneto. He told them he was retiring, but that he felt that those assembled were the best chance to dream a new, better dream, and that perhaps they could succeed where he could not. And with that, Xavier left Earth, secure in the knowledge that it could be a better world with the help of his former adversary, Magneto, who was now once again his friend. More importantly, both men were finally secure in the friendship that had defined them both. We saw some of Professor X and Magneto's greatest hits during Season 1 of Marvel Animation's X-Men '97, including the Trial of Magneto, as well as the Triumph and the Tragedy of Genosha. The season ended with both of them left trapped in ancient Egypt, and their story continues in Season 2. And we'll soon be seeing that friendship again on the big screen, as Professor X and Magneto will be appearing in Marvel Studios' Avengers Doomsday. And that is our abridged summary of Xavier and Magneto. Want to learn more? Sign up for Marvel Unlimited, where you can find the pair's many appearances. You can catch Seasons 1 and 2 of Marvel Animation's X-Men 97 on Disney+. And don't miss Marvel Studios' Avengers Doomsday on December 18th, only in theaters. If you're curious, here's the full list of comics referenced in this video. This has been Marvel Recap: Xavier and Magneto.